So, hi, good morning, everyone. So, a lot of things have been happening the past week. And I think na parang based on the transport strike, parang mag-extend siya on Friday. So, as a department, we had a important meeting last night in terms of parang how we're gonna be proceeding when it comes to your Module 2 exam. So, number one, Module 2 exam will still happen on Sunday. We'll have online classes instead. So as a rule, kapag online yung class, we won't have quizzes. So technically, that would mean whether it's good or bad, wala kayong quizzes sa Wednesday, today, and sa Friday. So now the question is, what would happen to the quizzes that were initially prepared for the class? Those quizzes will be instead be just given as other exercises for you to be able to prepare for your module 2 exam. With that said, if wala ng quizzes, if wala ng quizzes on Wednesday and Friday, that means that the only deliverables that you have to focus on in terms of the class would be number one, the problem set summary or the problem set submissions. So one would be, ang expectation ko is by now, hopefully, you're prepared na with chapter 6. And then the remaining days, you'll focus on cash. So that's why in problem set 7, I've already given you the answer key also so that you can go through the exercises na rin with that. So, anong itsura ng magiging lesson natin, ng plans natin? So, number one, on Friday, which was supposed to be like a quiz day, I will be discussing your two quizzes, one for inventory, one for cash, right? As a preparation for your exam. Prior beforehand, I'll just get secure approval so that I can share the materials with you already. So that parang wala lang just to make sure na may mga ibang classes pala magbigay or whatnot. So Friday, that's what's gonna happen. Saturday, we'll have our module exam. And then by the end of this lecture, which is gonna be on theory on cash, na-upload ko na yung mga cash exercises also earlier this week. We'll have, yeah. So for those that missed the first quiz, don't worry kasi nga we'll really go and give a special quiz at the very least after the exam. So the idea naman is nag-practice na kayo for the exam. So the next session na we get back from the exam, we'll give another quiz just to give other members of the class an opportunity to pull up their grade component. But let me know. So again, feel free to stay after the class in terms of the session. And then in terms of the grades, I prioritize lang getting out all of the materials. So again, it's really more about parang pacing yourselves kasi everything naman na is within was already uploaded online. So actually that will end my announcements. Are there any questions or clarifications before I proceed? If not, if everything's clear naman, kindly thumbs up so that we can begin today's lesson. So what if we're not gonna be taking the quiz, then basically you only have one quiz so far for module 2 and then another special quiz for after the exam. So parang ganun yung impact niya. But in terms of the learnings, we'll just give you the quiz item so that you know kung ano yung parang complexity of the exams. Yun. So with that said, today I'll allot this session in terms of the number of special quizzes we're discussing, so that would depend on two things. Number one would be in terms of like the department, and then number two would be in terms of the performance of the quiz one and also for the exam. So depending on the performance of those two, yung final number of special quizzes, but at least one. So just to give opportunity also for the people that one have missed it or two wants to bounce back from quiz one, right? So I think no more questions. So I think if everything's clear, then for this session, this marks the official parang, okay, we're done with inventory. So chapter 5, chapter 6, there's a lot of subtopics. So chapter 8 is really all about two things. Fraud and internal control. So again, I will simplify your learning into what are the four things you need to know about cash. So in cash, there are four subtopics, right? So there are four subtopics. One would be theory and anything that has to do with internal control. Number two would be in terms of cash inclusions. So similar with inventory, mayroong mga itatanong sa inyo, ito yung laman ng accounts niya. Which one of them would fall under the account cash and cash equivalent? So that's cash inclusions. Number three would be petty cash fund. Petty cash fund is more of like your subtopic in cash. And then finally, four, we have bank reconciliation. So apat lang yung aaralin natin for cash. Now, in terms of how you should attack it, for me, the easy things to master would be the internal control. So meaning, I'll highlight lang in today's lecture what to talk about. And then number two, cash inclusions. But again, for cash inclusions, ang important is dapat 100% of the items, alam nyo kung paano i-classify so that you'll get the point for that particular section. So dalawa yung madali. Then, petty cash funds sounds like a complex problem, but honestly, is pretty straightforward in terms of the procedure in order to be able to solve for it. And then finally, I think yung pinaka na-intimidate yung mga students would be bank reconciliation. So for bank reconciliation, there's numerous ways of going about it, but I will teach you the one method that you need to familiarize yourself so that regardless of kung ano yung given, you can work with that method. So in terms of expectation settings, I will discuss muna the first part. And then, I think by end of the normal class time, which is at 10 o'clock, matatapos natin si petty cash fund. But in terms of just so that you have an other added reference, aside from what's been uploaded, I'll take a deep dive again for bank reconciliation. So from 10 onwards, I'll continue the lecture to bank reconciliation. So when I upload, it's gonna be the whole theory section na for cash, right? So with that said, let's go to the first out of the four subtopics. So the reason why cash is very important is because it's the most liquid asset in terms of your asset classes. And one of the things that usually you talk about hand in hand with cash would be fraud, right? So ano ba yung fraud? Well, fraud in its formal definition is the act of deceiving or misrepresenting to obtain an unjust or illegal advantage. So basically, parang think about it as parang whether you're an employee or you're the boss, what you would do is you do an act, a dishonest act from involving cash that will result into your personal benefit at the cost of the company. So you have what you call the fraud triangle, right? So in terms of theory, ang important for you to know would be the fraud triangle. What are the three? You have financial pressure, meaning there are external forces, internal forces that makes you need money. Second would be you'll have rationalization, meaning that basically sabihin mo, ang dami-dami namang kinikita ng pera ng company and I don't think I'm properly rewarded. So that's the rationalism aspect. Yung parang the reason why you'd convince yourself that it's okay to commit fraud. And then lastly, you have the opportunity, meaning that the company has loopholes in terms of their operations that you can take advantage of, and that's when you can defraud the company. So out of the three, financial pressure, rationalization, opportunity, out of the three, the most important part of that triangle would be opportunity. Why opportunity? Because regardless kung gusto mo naman magnakaw sa company, if it has sufficient controls, then you won't be able to commit fraud, right? So with that said, how do we prevent fraud from happening, right? And why do we talk about fraud in terms of cash? It's because, simply put, cash is king. It's the standard medium of exchange in the business, and it's the most susceptible to fraudulent activities. That's the reason why kailangan, when we're handling cash in particular, because cash is king, we need what we call our internal control principles. So what are the things that we need to know about the internal control? Number one, it's established by our board of directors. And we do, or we create, our internal control so that we can have an efficient operation, reliable siya in terms of our financial reporting, and we ensure faithful compliance. So if they ask you, a good set of internal control boosts what? It's the reliability of your financial reporting. And at the end of the day, we create our internal control so that we can reach our corporate objectives. So, in terms of internal control, there are 5 components. So, ano yung kailangan natin tandaan here? For me, you just need to familiarize yourselves on what are the 5 components. So, that would be control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. So ano yung expectation? For you to be able to figure out which ones are components of internal control, so knowing the 5. And then number 2, if I give you a scenario, you need to be able to match which component that refers to. So now, let's go at it one by one. So control environment really refers to ano ba yung ginagawa ng top management nyo. So if you've been to an internship, meron kayong board of directors, meron kayong mga bosses. The control environment is dictated by the top management. So it's called quote-unquote tone at the top. Meaning, kung yung mga boss nyo talagang strict when it comes to internal policy, they have zero tolerance when it comes to lying, zero tolerance when it comes to fraudulent activities, and they value integrity, that is your first component of internal control. Meaning, kung yung boss nyo mismo, parang hindi nila pinapabayaan, hindi sila nag-a-allow ng any weird out of the rule book dealings within the company, that's a good sign that you have a good control environment. Anything that has to do with top management talks about controlled environment. Number 2 would be risk assessment. So as the name suggests, aside from this, the internal control department will identify and analyze ano bang part of our efficient process pose risk factors and how do we actually manage these risks. So risk assessment is just ano ba yung mga alanganing portions. Like for example, meron tayong treasurer. The treasurer has the physical access to the money. Siya rin ba dapat yung ipapa-report mo? Of course not. Because, pare, ako yung may hawak ng pera. Binigay sa akin 1,000. There should be a separate person that should have an access to how much ba dapat yung hawak ko. Because if ako lang yung magre-report, so sabihin ko lang, edi kung ano lang yung gusto ko, like 500, nawala po kasi or something like that. Right? So, risk assessment is just identifying which part of the company process are risky. And then in turn, we create control activities. We create policies and procedures na dapat, kuwari, kung ikaw yung may hawak ng pera, hindi dapat ikaw yung nag-account for the cash. Dapat separate yung naghahawak ng may pera and separate yung naghahawak ng record. So that, pag hindi nagkaroon ng discrepancy, pwede nating alamin kung sino yung may kasalanan. So that would fall under control activities. The last 2 would be, syempre, information and communication. So basically, once you've set the tone at the top, you've identified the risk, you've created the procedure is useless if you don't communicate it to your target market. So basically, information and communication is just telling your people. And then finally, monitoring is just, okay, nakaset na kayo, in-explain mo na, in-onboard mo na lahat, let's monitor from time to time to detect kung merong significant deficiencies. And that's when we report it at the top level of management. So with that said, so we're done with 5 components of internal control. The next thing is the 6 principles. So magkaiba si 5 components, magkaiba si 6 principles. So in the next 6 slides, I'll talk more about ano ba yung mga principles of internal control. Again, ang expectation is you know the 6 principles. And then if I tell you a scenario, you should be able to match which principle is highlighted. So let's go one by one. First is, in the first important principle of creating your internal control is that there should be an establishment of responsibility. So control is most effective when only one person is responsible for a given task. So basically, it eases the monitoring of compliance and establishes accountability for a specific role to a specific person. So for example, meron kang gustong bantayan na safe, right? May safe in the office. Hindi pwede na you assign 3 people to guard the safe at the same time. Because, ano mangyayari doon? If you assign 3 people, and then may something na nangyari doon sa safe, sino yung accountable ultimately? Is it person A, B, or C? Dapat, it should be one responsibility, one person, para isa lang yung accountable, so that you can trace who has the main responsibility. Another thing is that if sila lang yung accountable for it, tataas rin yung likelihood nila of valuing the specific responsibility kasi wala na silang pwedeng isisihin when it comes to that particular responsibility. So establishment of responsibility, it's only when only one person is responsible for a given task. Next would be, now that tag-iisa lang sila ng task, there should always be, and I think this is one of the most important part of internal control, is segregation of duties. Meaning, related activities should be assigned to different individuals. So, ano yung important? And please memorize this. There should be the separation of authorization, custody, and recording. Meaning, if you're in an org or if you're in a company, meron kayong funds, right? And those funds, ideally, gagamitin nyo lang for company use, right? So, number 1, kailangan may isa kang role that will authorize kung kailan pwedeng gamitin yung fund. So, let's say may pakain kayo, there should be one person na mag-authorize na, okay, gamitin natin tong money na to, let's say 5,000, so that we can use it to buy pizza. So, one person to authorize. Number 2, meron ka dapat person na nasa kanya physically yung pera. So that, let's say you have 20,000 in your org fund. So, one person will authorize, pero hindi yun yung may hawak. Ang may hawak is yung, probably, your treasurer. So, yung treasurer nyo has 20,000. Okay, sige, I'll buy 5,000. And then, the last person would be the one that will check, yung magre-record. So, sasabihin niya, okay, 20,000 minus 5, kailangan 15,000 yung laman ng cash. So, now, at the end, pagkatapos yung napakain lahat, yung tagahawak, the one that has custody, and the recorder, and yung nag-authorize, they will all talk together. How much should be the cash balance? Of course, that should be 15,000. So, you have 3 different roles, and you segregated related activities to different duties. So, segregation of duties. So, ganun lang yung idea behind it. Number 3 would be documentation procedures. So, aside from segregating the roles, another thing is that we have to have a documentation process so that you can provide evidence. So, ano yung mga example nito? Using pre-numbered documents, and all documents should be accounted for. Basically, ang idea nito is that, may mga invoices ka. Yung mga invoices mo or yung mga documents mo, naka-pre-number na siya from 1 to 1,000. The reason being, so that people can avoid just printing a new document and then ipapasok nila in the file. Kailangan naka-pre-number siya so that pag may wala, so 1 to 10, nawala si 7, pero biglang may 11 doon, you'd see na parang this 11 is suspicious kasi we only pre-numbered 1 to 10. Tapos missing si 7. So what you can derive from that is that based from your documents, merong nagtanggal ng number 7 out of the pile, nagpalit ng bago, nilagay 11. So, alam nyo kung sino yung fraudulent out of those documents. So, documentation procedure just says that you need to provide evidence. And then aside from the evidence, you have physical control. So, number 4, physical control. So, physical controls, as the name suggests, anything physical that could safeguard your assets. Vaults, passwords, alarms, time clocks to record kung kailan pumasok or lumabas yung employees. All of these are physical controls. And then finally, the last two would be independent internal verification. So now that you have your internal control, basically the idea is that the company should review periodically if gumagana ba yung internal controls in their company. The idea here is that an employee who's independent of the personnel responsible for the independent should make the verification. So the idea here is that, kuwari, you have the accounting employee na siya yung naghahawak ng records of the cash. You have the cashier na siya yung may hawak ng pera. So you have segregation of duties in the sense that in relation to cash, merong segregation na ito yung nagbe-maintain ng record, ito yung nagko-custody in cash. The one that needs to independently and internally verify this should be your assistant treasurer. So i-compare niya, tama ba yung pag-record na to? May discrepancy ba in terms of the number of cash and yung sa books? So you need to have independent internal verification. So the idea here is that sa verification, it has to be separate from the roles. Hindi pwedeng si accounting employee will verify na, tama kami ni assistant cashier, or si assistant cashier will say, tama kami ni accounting employee. It has to be an independent internal verification outside the rules. And then lastly, you have human resource controls wherein, syempre, garbage in, garbage out. So in terms of your employee, in terms of the culture, the important thing is that, of course, if you're hiring honest people that won't do fraudulent activities, mas mababa yung risk na may mangyayaring nakawan in the company. So under HR, you just conduct background checks during interviews, iniikot mo yung mga employees so that they don't get used to one role, or even, I don't know if you've had experience when it comes to your parents or your siblings, meron silang mandatory leave. So ano nangyayari doon? Usually, you're given around a week na hindi ka papapasukin. Free. Binabayaran ka pa rin. Pero in exchange, they will conduct a background check kung whether merong anything weird happening in terms of your responsibility. That's their opportunity for you not to be able to cover up your mistakes physically in the company, right? And then, that's a HR control. So, these are the 6. The only thing that's important here is that familiarize yourselves with the 6. And then if there's any example, you should be able to identify which of the 6 principles would that example belong to. So, ang dami natin pinag-usapan for the past few minutes. But honestly, at the end of the day, regardless of your 5 components and your 6 principles of internal control, it can only give you reasonable assurance. So again, it will only give you reasonable assurance. It's not fail-safe, it's not foolproof. Ang binibigay lang nila is reasonable assurance na you're able to safeguard the assets and reliable yung accounting records. Why? There are a lot of limitations for internal control. Number 1, it's ineffective as a result of various human elements. So, it can also be circumvented, it can be overridden by management. Pag sobrang laki ng business, hindi na mahirap na i-track, and business conditions may change over time. So for example, during the pandemic, naging online lahat. So lahat ng physical controls mo and the things that you were supposed to do in the office, wala na tayong internal control. Another thing, kahit gaano kagaling yung internal control nyo, if your boss and your CEO or your top management, they really want to steal money, and they're the ones in charge of creating these internal controls, and they're the ones in charge of checking that everything is happening properly, no matter how good your safeguards are, they can circumvent that kasi all the power would be within them, right? So, with that, that ends the first subtopic, which is the theory for fraud in internal control. So, for theory questions, please make sure na you know the fraud triangle, the 5 components of internal control, the 6 principles, and the idea that it can only provide you what? Reasonable assurance in terms of your reliability and safeguarding of assets. Now, again, babalik tayo to bakit ba natin pinag-uusapan yung fraud? Because nga, cash is king. If there's any asset that I don't need to explain to you in terms of like more layman's terms, it's cash. But now, one of my caveats here is that cash is different in accounting. It is more than just yung money that you're aware. So I think from your perspective, the cash that you're familiar with would be coins, like coins. Yung mga bills natin, and of course, yung anything electronic. So GCash, etc., etc. And then if you're able to also have banks in terms of like transactions within your stay, you know also checks, right? So now, let's just align. What is cash and cash equivalents? So some things to take note. There is no specific standard for what cash is. Basically, ang guidance lang natin is PAS1, wherein we shall classify any current asset as a cash or cash equivalent unless two things. They're restricted from being exchanged or it's used to settle a liability that's non-current, or so meaning non-current at least 12 months. So, ang definition natin ng cash is that cash is more than money, more than the money that you're aware of. Number two, cash, for it to be cash, should be unrestricted in use. Again, cash should be unrestricted in use. Dapat pwede mong gawin kung whatever you want in cash. And number three, cash should be readily available. So, the reason why these three things must happen is that cash is king. The reason why people love cash is that it's the standard medium of exchange. It's the most liquid. Meaning, anything that you want to do in life, in terms of like economics and in terms of like business transactions, you need cash. And cash should be liquid. And therefore, for it to be liquid, it should be unrestricted in use and readily available for you. Cash that is not unrestricted in use and readily available is not cash, right? And then on the other hand, because it's the most liquid, people want to get it. And therefore, it's the most susceptible to fraudulent activities. So using this definition, accounting has a more unique way of looking at what is cash. And honestly, expanding that definition to cash and cash equivalents. So, as the name suggests, cash and cash equivalents. On the left side, you have your different cash. On the right side, you have your cash equivalent. So, when I say cash, that would pertain to three things. Cash on hand, cash in bank, and your different cash funds. And then, separate na yung cash equivalents, right? So, don't worry, iisa-isahin lang natin. Pero what I want you to understand now is the structure. At the top is cash and cash equivalents. Yan yung hahanapin sa inyo in the exam or in the exercises. What is the cash and cash equivalents total? And now you have to break it down into what is the cash and what is the cash equivalent. And then under cash, what is cash on hand, what is cash in bank, and what is cash fund. So let's work it out. The first thing that's very unfamiliar for you is cash equivalent. So let's first work in terms of our cash equivalent. So your cash equivalent basically is short-term investments, meaning yung pera mo, nilagay mo na sa isang investment. So some would argue, sir, hindi ba yun dapat short-term investment? It has to meet a specific criteria na it's cash equivalent if it meets this criteria called STHLRCIR3P. So the investment should be short-term, highly liquid, readily convertible, and it has insignificant risk. But honestly, ang pinaka-importante lang dito is that if it's a short-term investment that you purchased 3 months before its maturity date, meaning kung kailan magkakaroon ng return sa money, that would be a cash equivalent. So, in the theory portion of your or in the exercises, you will come across different investments. Money market instrument, treasury bills, treasury notes, treasury bonds, commercial paper, time deposit. All of these things are just investments. So, as of that moment, titingnan nyo muna if it follows the 3-month rule. Meaning, regardless kung T-bills, treasury notes, treasury bonds, commercial paper, time deposit, if you purchase that 3 months before maturity, 3 months before maturity, that would be considered a cash equivalent. Now, yung money market instrument is usually defined as something that has a maturity below 3 months. So automatic, that's gonna be a cash equivalent. So, paano ba natin iintindihin the scenario? So, Castro Corp had the following balances during the year end. So, right now is December 31, 2022. So, may T-bills ka raw na you purchased November 1, 2022, maturing January 1, 2023. So, is it within 3 months? Well, November now, kung kailan ko pinurchase, kailan siya magmamature? January 31. So we count November, December, January. It's within 3 months. So we count the 750,000 as a cash equivalent. Number 2, may time deposit ka maturing March 31 na you purchase December 1. So we count. Is it 3 months before maturity date? December 1 mo binili, December, January, February, March. 4 months. So, hindi siya 4 months, more than 3 months siya. So, hindi siya isasama as cash equivalent. Number 3, cash in money market account. It's silent, but you know that money market account is below 3 months. So, automatic, it's within 3 months. So, isasama rin natin siya. And then you have a 10-year treasury bond. So, kakaisipin nyo, baka non-current asset. But, kailan siya magmamature? February 14. Kailan mo binili? December 20. So, does it follow the 3-month rule? December 20, so January 20, February 20. So, within 3 months, we include. So, ang tanong lang naman sa inyo in this portion would be, what is the total cash equivalent for Castro Corp? The answer is 750 plus 50 plus 50 is 850,000. So, ang rule lang talaga is, if it's short-term investments, you just look at the 3-month rule. Kailan siya magmamature? And if you bought it 3 months before the maturity date, it's gonna be a cash equivalent. So, please familiarize yourselves in STHLRCIR. It should be short-term, highly liquid, readily convertible, that poses an insignificant risk na hindi magbabago yung amount. And ang pinaka-importante is that it should be purchased 3 months before maturity. So we're done. We're already good at cash equivalent. So we're done with one side. Let's go to the other side. Let's classify cash. So cash, you have 3 components. And don't worry, iisa-isahin natin siya. You have cash on hand, meaning cash mo physically with you. You have cash in bank, anything that has to do with your bank. And then you have cash funds, meaning this is a pool of cash that's partially restricted for a certain use, right? So, ang importante lang is may 3 components si cash. Cash on hand, cash in bank, cash fund. Let's first go to cash on hand. So cash on hand, ang formal definition is that these are referring to undeposited cash collections. So there are 6 things that I want you to know. You have your money, which is composed of your coins and currency. You have your checks na mayroong different names. You have your undelivered, unreleased checks. So puro checks lang to from 1 to 5, and then you have money order. So isa-isahin natin. So first, pinakamadali, coins and currencies. So anything that is in circulation and legal tender, ito yung cash. So automatic, kapag coins and currencies, meaning yung mga peso coins and yung mga bills, these are cash. Right? Automatic. Money is cash. But cash is more than money, right? It's more than money. Meron pang iba. So what are the other things? Number 2 na pinaka-importante na I want you to learn would be, what is a check? So a check is just basically a way for us to be able to pay money. So sino ba yung mga parties sa check? You have your payer or your drawer. So please identify kung sino. So you have your payer. Si payer yung magsusulat ng check. Ibibigay niya kay pay. So in a sense, for example, I have a friend. May utang ako sa kanya, let's say 50,000. Syempre, ayoko naman naglalakad ng 50,000. Let's say wala pang GCash, right? Ayoko naglalakad with 50,000. So rather than expose myself to the risk, what I'll do is I'll write him a check. If ako yung nagsulat, I'm the payer or I'm the drawer of the check. Pag binigay ko kay friend, si friend is si payee. So let's say, ang pangalan ng friend ko, si Juan de la Cruz. Right? So, ang payer is ako. Ang pangalan ng payee is si Juan de la Cruz. So, si Juan de la Cruz yung makakatanggap. How much? 100,000. Now, in between us, sino talaga yung magbibigay sa kanya ng pera? Hindi naman ako, right? Yung bangko ko. Kasi, ang assumption is, meron akong pera sa bangko, in this case, BDO. And then si BDO, pag nakita niya yon, okay, kukunin ko yung pera ni Adrian from BDO, babayad ko kay Juan de la Cruz. So, in essence, tatlo yung parties. You have your payer, kung sino yung magbabayad ng money, and siya si maker of the check. Number 2, meron kang drawee, in this case, si BDO. And then payee would be Juan de la Cruz. Siya yung makakatanggap ng pera. Other important things. How do you get the money? Well, there are 2 ways for Juan de la Cruz to earn or to get the money. Either ide-deposit niya to any bank. So, meron siyang clearing time. So, may BDO check ka. If you're Juan de la Cruz, you can deposit it in BDO, you can deposit it in BPI, in Union Bank. Wherein, ang mangyayari is that may clearing time. If you're not the same bank, meaning pinasok mo yung BDO sa isang BPI account, it will take 3 days for BDO and BPI to talk to each other. Na, uy, itaas mo yung account ni Juan de la Cruz, right? But there's another way. Instead of depositing, you can actually encash this. Pero the difference lang is you can only encash it through a BDO branch, right? So again, as Juan de la Cruz, how do you get the money? Either 1, ide-deposit mo para tumaas yung balance mo in the bank, or 2, you can encash it. Right? So again, when you encash, kailangan sa same bank mo lang. So basically, ano ba yung bank clearing? The bank clearing lang would be, i-check lang nila kung sufficient ba yung funds ko. Kasi pwede naman, nagsulat lang ako ng random number pero wala naman talagang laman yung account ko. So what they will do is they will check kung sufficient ba yung account ko as the payer, and then babawasan nila yung account ko, and then dun lang nila ita-transfer yung money to the payee. So syempre, madali siya kung BDO to BDO. Titingnan nila yung account ko in their system, titingnan nila yung account mo in their system, kukunin nila yung pera from my account, ililipat nila to your account. Pero let's say, dineposit mo to Union Bank, same process, pero bakit siya mas mahaba? It's because si BDO, iti-check niya kung may laman ba yung account ko, and then, pag may laman, tatanggalin niya, ita-transfer niya kay Union Bank, and then si Union Bank, ilalagay niya yung pera dun sa account mo. There are more banks talking to each other, kaya mas matagal yung clearing time. So in a nutshell, that is a check. Now, there are different scenarios involving a check. There are different types of checks. So for me, just go through this with me and take note. Ang importante lang is, cash ba to or not? Cash ba to or not? So let's go. Number 1, manager's check or cashier's check. If nakita niyo yan, think of it as automatic cash. Ang ginagawa lang nito is that the manager's check will already, bago mo palang in-issue, hindi, tira mo, nakita nyo, it's printed. Hindi ko sinulat. Ang ibig sabihin nito, if it's a manager's check, they already deducted your account. So itong 20,000 na to, binawas na nila sa account mo. Automatic. So automatic na check na nila na sufficient yung funds mo. So manager's check, cashier's check, cash. Next, certified check. So as you can see, naka-stamp siyang certified. So basically, similar with manager's check, sinertify lang niya na your account is sufficient. And finreeze na nila yung amount. So in this case, it's 5,309 Canadian dollars. So again, manager's check, certified check, it's cash. Traveler's check, pag may nakita kayo nito, it's good as cash. Basically, ang mangyayari lang dito is that, for example ako, I have a work trip to US. I go to my PH bank and then I'll give them cash. And in return, they'll give me USD traveler's check. And then you go to a Thai bank and present this, let's say punta akong Thailand pala, and you present this USD travel check to get cash in USD at a lower rate. So, honestly, maraming mga nuances. I don't expect you to know. What I want you to know lang is manager's check, cashier's check, certified check, traveler's check, all are cash. Iba-iba yung checks, but all are cash, right? So, just know na all are cash. The next thing is that nagsulat, let's say, nag-draw ka and nag-record ka ng check. Pero, so for example, ako, nasulat ko na yung check. Pero, let's say, last day na of the month. Last day na of the month, and hindi ko pa pala na physically nabibigay kay Juan de la Cruz. So, that means na nasulat ko na yung check, nasa akin na, pero hindi ko binigay kay Juan de la Cruz. That is an example of an unreleased, undelivered check. So, from the point of view of the payer or yung gumawa, when I made the check, my assumption is, okay, sinulat ko na. So, technically, wala na dapat akong utang. So, what I will do is write my journal entry, debit accounts payable, credit cash. In my head, nag-issue na ako ng check. So, dapat bababa na yung utang ko and bababa rin yung cash kasi bibigyan ko siya ng check. However, if at the end of the month, na-realize mo, shucks, nasulat ko na pala yung check, pero hindi ko pa pala nabibigay dun sa kay Juan de la Cruz kung kanino ko may utang. So yung check na yun, technically, na kanino pa yung pera? Nasa iyo pa rin. Kasi hindi mo namigay eh. So wala siyang way for them to be able to cash or deposit it. And therefore, what you need to do is to reverse the initial entry that you made as soon as possible. Meaning, itataas mo yung cash mo kasi nasa iyo pa yung cash. Pero, yung accounts payable mo, ibabalik mo. May utang ka pa rin. Kasi hindi mo pa rin nabayaran. So, ang importante dito is there is a adjusting entry na debit cash, credit accounts payable. So, ni-reverse mo lang, right? So, that's basically unreleased or undelivered check. So, again, kung hindi na deliver, kay payer pa rin yung cash. Kung sino yung gumawa, nasa kanya pa rin yung cash. So, let's look at it from the point of view of the payee. Well, from the point of view of the payee, wala ka pang entry. So, si Juan de la Cruz, wala siyang entry because wala naman siyang natanggap, right? So, it's not yet cash on their end. So, kay payee, ang mangyayari lang is may utang pa siya sa'yo. Ay may utang pa siyang ine-expect from you. Right? So, again, yung unreleased or undelivered check, ang ma-affect niyan is kung sino yung nagsulat. Kapag dinadak na nila yung cash, they just have to reinstate it. Pag na-realize na lang, hindi nila na-deliver. So, Like, let's put an example. Let's say that 5,000 check dated December 1 has been drawn and recorded, pero hindi pa na-deliver to the payee on December 31. Ano ba yung mga journal entries that you would expect? Well, on December 1, since sinulat mo na, the journal entry would be debit accounts payable, credit cash of 5,000 because alam mo na, okay, nagsulat na ako ng check. So, dapat bababa na yung utang ko. Fast forward to December 31, when you were browsing through your drawers, may nakita kang cheque. Hindi pala na-deliver doon sa pay. So, may utang ka pa rin. So, sabihin mo, shucks, kailangan kong i-reverse yung entry ko ng December 1. So, ang reversing entry or adjusting entry mo would be debit cash of 5,000, credit accounts payable of 5,000. So, basically, balik ka to status quo. May utang ka pa rin, pero hindi ka nabawasan ng cash. So, again, the idea lang is unreleased checks or undelivered checks, you need to reverse yung cash na kay drawer pa rin. So, we're done with unreleased or undelivered check. The next topic would be post-dated check. So, ano naman yung difference ng post-dated check? Basically, it's a drawn and recorded check. So, okay na tayo. Na-deliver mo na. So, hindi siya undelivered. Na kay pay na siya. So, in this example, let's say, Philippine PLDT has a post-dated check to Maria Leonora Lugawan and Ice Cream Trading Inc. So, si PLDT, gumawa siya ng check, binigay niya na kay Maria Leonora, pero kailan niya binigay? Let's say, binigay niya yung date, December 25. Let's say, ang period na yon is December 31, 2022. Pero, if you look at the date, April 10, 2023 pa. So, it's post-dated, meaning December 31, 2022 ngayon. So, technically, ang assumption mo is that the date of the check should be December. Pero, what PLDT did was they post-dated the check to April 10. So, now, kailan lang ni Maria Leonora, kailan lang niya pwedeng i-deposit or in-cash yung check? Sa December or sa April? Well, since it's nakalagay April 10, sa April 10 pa lang niya makukuha yung check. So, this is an example of a post-dated check. Yes, na kay Maria Leonora na yung check, pero kailan lang niya magiging pera yon? On April 10. So, from the point of view of the payer, so this is payer, right? Payer. Nung ginawa niya yung check, same. Binawas niya yung utang niya kay Maria Leonora. So, debit accounts payable, credit cash. Pero, nung na-realize niya na it was post-dated, kailangan ulit niyang i-reverse. Kasi technically, yung pera is still with them, the one that made the check. So, debit cash, credit accounts payable. So, post-dated check. 10,000 check dated January 4, 2023 has been recorded and delivered to the payee on December 25. So, kailan yung end of the period? December 31. Kailan yung date ng check? January 4. It's after the cutoff of the date. So, it's a post-dated check. So, when the payee received the check, ano mangyayari? So, S signifies paid, right? So, when the payee received the check, sabi niya, wow, nice. May 10,000 ako. So, debit cash, credit, accounts receivable. Meaning, nakatanggap niya na yung utang sa kanya. But then, on December 31, na-realize niya, wait lang. Pumunta ako sa bangko. Sabi ko, gusto ko na i-deposit or in cash. Pero sabi nila, dahil January 4, yung nakalagay sa check, post-dated check siya. Therefore, ayaw nila tanggapin. Sabi nila, hindi ko pa raw siya pera. So, yung 10,000 na yun, sino pa yung may-ari? Yung gumawa ng check, si drawer. So, as a payee, sasabihin mo, hindi pa pala ako nabayaran, January 4 pa ako nabayaran. So, on December 31, you have to reverse the entry na debit accounts receivable, credit cash of 10,000. Because, technically, may utang pa rin siya sa'yo. hindi pa rin siya cash on your end as a payee, right? So, basically, ganun lang yung concept ng post-dated check. Next, stale check or check outstanding. So, ito naman, the important thing here is that kapag binigay kayo ng check, so, kuwari, April 10, binigay sa inyo yung check, you have 6 months in order for you to deposit or encash it, or 180 days from issuance. Now, ang expectation is, binigay na kay Maria Leonora yung check. Kailangan, within 6 months from April 10 to October 10, kailangan ipasok niya na sa bank or i-encash niya. Kapag hindi niya pinasok on time, that would be stale check or check outstanding. So, meaning, in terms of the POV of the drawer, meaning ako yung si PLDT, initially, nung binigay ko kay Maria Leonora, I debited accounts payable, credit, cash. Pero after 6 months, tumawag ako sa bank. Sabi ko, hi, na-encash na ba ni Maria Leonora yung check na binigay ko? And then they said, actually sir, hindi pa po niya na-deposit to any bank. So in your head, okay, edi kailangan maging pera ko ulit yon kasi now I have to issue another check. So i-debit mo yung cash, pero may utang ka pa rin ulit, right? So in the POV of the payee kay Maria Leonora, what will happen is, nice, may na-receive ka ng check. So may cash, debit cash, credit, accounts receivable. Pero after 6 months, because of your negligence, naging stale yung check. Hindi mo na pwedeng i-deposit. So now you'll be like, hindi ko na to pwedeng gamitin. So, ang sasabihin mo is, okay, magde-debit back ako ng accounts receivable, pero mag-credit back ako ng cash because hindi ko na siya pwedeng gamitin, right? So, you need to reverse. So, as an example, 7,500 check dated May 31 has been recorded and delivered to the payee on the same date. Pero hindi pa rin in-encash ng December 31. So, that's more than 6 months. So, when the drawer, nung May 31, sabi niya, okay, nagbigay na ako ng check, wala na akong accountability. Debit accounts payable, credit cash of 7,500. Fast forward to December 31. Tumawag ka sa bank mo, sinabi mo, yung payee ba, ginamit niya yung check? Sabi nila, sir, hindi po. So technically, yung cash, nasa iyo pa rin. So now, you will debit cash, credit, accounts payable of 7,500. So this is the POV of the drawer, right? So this is the POV of the drawer. On the other hand, POV of the payee. Nung May 31, nung na-receive mo yung check, sasabihin nila, nice. Tumaas, nabayaran na ako. So, debit cash, credit AR. Pero again, due to their negligence, after 6 months, tinry nilang ipasok sa bank ng December 31. Sabi ng bank, sorry po, stale check na po yan. Hindi na po namin pwedeng tanggapin. Mag-issue na lang po kayo ng bago pong check from the drawer. If ganun, then technically, wala ka pang cash. So, i-reverse mo ulit yung ginawa mo. Debit accounts receivable, credit cash of 7,500. So, last thing on checks, bounce check. So, basically, it's a check na nilagay na, pero apparently, wala ka palang pera. So, there are different names for a bounce check. Ang pinaka-common, and ito yung super important for you to know, NSF, not sufficient funds, DAIF, drawn against insufficient funds, or DAUD, draw against unclear deposit. It looks unfamiliar, but the end of the day, isa lang yung sinasabi niya. Let's say, meron kang car loan sa India, and then ang utang is 1,23,500 only, right? Pero wala ka talagang ganung pera. So pag in-issue mo yung check, tapos chinek nila yung account mo, ima-mark check bounce because of NSF, DAIF, or DAUD. So ang pinaka-important dito is NSF. Meaning, it's due to account pero insufficient. So I don't know if meron if back then or usap pa nung kabataan nyo, yung mga teledrama na parang may mga matapobreng mayayaman sa teledrama na parang eto, parang blank check, parang isulat mo kung magkano, nakapirma na yan, blah, blah, blah. Parang layuan mo lang anak ko, etc., etc. That is an example na sobrang confident sila, na sobrang dami nilang pera, they'll be able to clear the check regardless of anong amount, kung 10 million ba yan, whatever, whatever. On the other hand, in parang ways to fraud people, parang sabihin mo, yeah, definitely may 500,000 ako. Kahit na wala ka naman talagang pera. What you'll do is just you'll get to your checking book, lalagay mo 500,000, and then ibibigay mo sa kanila, tapos tataguan mo na sila. On their end, ang mangyayari is magbabounce yung check, and that's a criminal offense, right? So, bouncing checks law. So, pag bounce check, invalid siya. So, what will happen? Let's say, ikaw yung binayaran. NSF, right? So, nung pagtanggap mo ng check, wow, nice, naka-receive ako ng pera. So, debit cash, credit AR. And then, pinasok mo sa bank, tinanggap kasi hindi siya stale. Within 6 months mo, pinasok. After 3 days, minessage ko ng bank, sorry po, parang tumalbog po yung cheque, meaning na-deny. Bakit? Kasi yung nagsulat po ng cheque, wala naman po talaga silang pera doon sa bank nila. So in your head, hindi mo na makukuha yung pera doon. And therefore, you have to reverse debit AR, credit cash of the amount. So let's have an example. 1 million check dated May 31 has been recorded and delivered to the payee on the same date. So si payee, sobrang happy. Nice. May 1 million na pala ako. Wala nang utang na AR of 1 million. So, debit cash, credit AR of 1 million. Pero, nung July 31, nung pinasok mo na, in-inform ka ng bank na, sorry po, tumalbog. So, magagalit ka. NSF pala, not sufficient funds. So, ang mangyayari is i-reverse mo, may utang pa rin yung tao sa'yo, so debit accounts receivable, wala ka pa palang cash, so credit cash of 1 million. So this is the POV of the payee. And then finally, you'll have money order na, honestly, again, this is just an example, mas sa postal service to, sa mas US to, good as cash. So, sorry, ang daming kailangan sabihin, pero ito lang yung kailangan nyong i-master. Money, coins and currency, cash. Checks, managers, cashiers, certified travelers, considered as cash. Money orders, considered as cash. Ano lang yung mga weird? Anything that has to do with checks. If undelivered or unreleased, yung cash na kay drawer pa rin. Kung sino yung nagsulat. Kapag post-dated, yung pera na kay drawer pa rin. Kapag stale checks, na kay drawer pa rin. So if ever meron kang recording na sa payee na dineliver na sa yung checks, you have to reverse those entries. Si undelivered kaya walang entry si payee is because wala silang natanggap. And then pag bounce check, kailangan reverse the cash recording as a payee. So, ang dami natin pinag-usapan within the last 20 minutes, but it could be studied within this one slide. Again, coins and currencies, managers, cashiers, travelers, certified checks, and money orders, always cash. 0, 1, and 6. Number 2, from number 2, 3, 4, 5, undelivered checks, post-dated checks, stale checks, and bound checks, lahat nun yung cash na kay drawer pa rin. So meaning, as a payee, yung nakatanggap ng check, you just have to reverse the cash recording. Kasi hindi mo pa pera yon. Pera yon nung tao, supposedly, na nag-issue nung check. Right? So, are there any questions or clear pa naman so far? So, kindly thumbs up if everything's clear on cash on hand or if there's any questions. So, feel free to use the chat if you have any questions on cash on hand. Okay. So, I think clear pa naman. So, we can proceed to cash in bank. So cash in bank is anything that has to do with your bank. These are deposited cash accounts. So you have a checking account na another term is demand deposit. So as long as checking account siya, ang importante to note is that it's non-interest bearing. So checking account are deposits covered by deposit slips, kaya demand deposit. And they are withdrawable by demand. So if you have an East West mobile banking, you'll see meron kang iba-ibang accounts. You'll have savings, you'll have prepaid account. So typically, ang checking account has the higher maintaining balance, right? So checking account, always cash in bank. Savings account, on the other hand, is interest bearing. So kailangan mo ng passbook. It's withdrawable by demand. So typically, it has a lower maintaining balance. So again, checking account, non-interest bearing, has a higher maintaining balance. Savings account, interest bearing, has a lower maintaining balance. At the end of the day, both are automatically cash in bank. So pag may nakita kayong checking account, savings account, automatic bank, cash in bank. Yun. Now, dalawa lang naman yung mahirap sa bank, cash in bank. Bank overdraft yung first. So a bank overdraft would look like this. Meron kang account, $100. Tapos, gumastos ka using your checking account. If you add all of your expenses, you have an overdraft fee of 105. So now, negative na yung account mo. Negative na, 105. So, mawiwirduhan ka. Bakit negative na yung checking account ko? That is an example of a bank overdraft. So, the question is, how do you account for your bank overdraft? The rule lang would be, bank overdraft as a default is a current liability. Kasi may negative balance ka in your bank. May utang ka sa bank. Ano lang yung exception? You can offset your bank overdraft to cash if and only if meron kang another account in the same bank na pwede mong bawasan to offset the liability. So, how would that look like? Scenario 1 muna tayo. You have a negative 10,000 in your BDO bank. So, in terms of bank overdraft, may 10,000 ka. Pero may pera ka pa rin sa BPI. Because they're different banks, you cannot offset these two figures. So, what will happen? What will happen would be, ang i-record mo for scenario 1 in this first square is current liability 10,000 because of your bank overdraft. Cash in bank BPI 30,000. So, dalawa yung items mo. That is scenario 1. You can't offset because different yung banks, BDO and BPI. On the other hand, let's say, may BDO account ka na negative 10,000 pero meron ka pang isa pang account, BDO2, same bank, na 30,000. So here, pwede mo siya lang i-offset. That's the exception to the rule. Na ang i-report mo na lang is cash in bank net of overdraft 20,000. So, yun yung difference. So again, pag bank overdraft, the default is current liability siya. But if you have another account in the same bank, that would be a potential for offsetting. So again, titingnan nyo lang kung may different accounts. So next, and the last for cash in bank is compensating balance. So for a compensating balance, basically, it's the minimum balance required by a financial institution. And then the important thing lang naman dito is that it could be legally restricted or not. So, for example, kung interested ka in BPI, you have different accounts, right? Easy Saver, Jumpstart Savings. Meron kang required maintaining balance, 1,000, 3,000, 10,000. Now, the question lang naman for compensating balance is it legally restricted? If yes, then it's not cash. It's current assets or non-current assets, depending on the formal compensating balance agreement. But if it's not legally restricted, it's cash and cash equivalent. So again, pag compensating balance, tatanong mo lang yung sarili mo, is it legally restricted? If no, it's cash in, cash equivalent. So, we're done with cash in bank. Checking account, savings account, automatic cash. Bank overdraft, generally, it's a current liability. Pero, if you have another account in the same bank, you can offset. And then finally, for compensating balance, if it's not legally restricted, meaning it's readily available for your use, then that's cash. So we're done with the two. Cash on hand, cash in bank, and then finally, cash funds. So basically, cash funds are set aside for a specific purpose. So for example, meron kang fund na ito pang payroll lang to, ito pang dividend lang to, or ito pang petty cash lang to. So the idea here is that you just ask yourself, ano ba yung purpose ng fund? If it's for current purposes, meaning dividend is current purposes, payroll is current purposes, petty cash is for current purposes, all of those will be cash and cash equivalent. Pero if you have a non-current liability na, pare, nag-iipon ako ng cash, yung funds ko for a bond sinking fund. Bond sinking meaning it's for a non-current liability. Dahil non-current yung purpose ko of keeping that fund, that would be a non-current asset. So yun lang yung rules pag cash fund. If it's for current purposes like cash fund, payroll fund, dividend fund, petty cash fund, automatic cash and cash equivalent siya. So, to summarize everything, ito yung important slide for cash and cash equivalents. So for cash, it's comprised of cash on hand, cash in bank, and cash fund. And basically, aside from that, you'll just need to know your cash equivalent. So simply put, cash is more than money, and it has to be unrestricted in use, as you can see from your compensating balance, and it has to be readily available. And with that, and I think I've already uploaded naman the exercises for this and also the answer key to your exercise. Madali si cash inclusion because you just have to familiarize yourselves with these concepts. Ang itatanong lang naman sa'yo na talaga is, what is the ending balance of your cash and cash equivalent? Right? And therefore, we're done now with two subtopics. We're done with the theory of internal control, and then we're done with cash and cash equivalents. So for the last, since we're talking about cash fund, the one cash fund na we want to focus on would be petty cash fund. So automatic, if may nakita kayong petty cash fund, that is cash, right? And what is a petty cash fund? So honestly, if pumunta kayo sa isang office or pumunta kayo sa office, may makikita kayo, merong kahera na may naka-lock box. That is an example of a petty cash fund. And the reason being is that because cash is the most susceptible to fraud, one way to circumvent that is through what? We have our cash receipts control and our cash disbursements control. And one of the internal control systems that we have would be what we call a petty cash fund. It's a fund used to pay relatively small amounts that cannot be economically and conveniently paid through by check. So, for this, I will play this animation, given na I think this explainer video simplifies petty cash pretty well. With that, I will share my sound and optimize for video clip. So for the next 5 minutes, let's just listen to this.
Accounting for petty cash. Petty cash is used in companies for small dollar item purchases that need to be paid in cash. Usually, petty cash is used for items such as purchasing coffee and donuts for meetings, postage, office supplies, or other miscellaneous expenses. Most companies choose to have a petty cash fund because it helps to eliminate multiple journal entries for small dollar amounts. A company must decide how much they want in their petty cash fund. Petty cash funds can range from $50 to $1,000, or really any amount that the company decides. When a company decides they need a petty cash fund, it must be established with a journal entry. For a $200 petty cash fund, we would debit petty cash and credit cash. The company is effectively writing a $200 check that will be cashed to make the starter money for the petty cash box. The check is then given to the employee who is the petty cash custodian. That employee takes the check to the bank and gets the actual cash to put into the petty cash box. Then, throughout the month, when employees need to use petty cash for various purchases, they will get the cash from the custodian and in return give the custodian the receipt for the expenses. The custodian is responsible for tracking the money used and the receipts returned. At the end of the month, the custodian reconciles the petty cash fund by totaling the receipts and counting the remaining cash in the box. If no errors were made, the total receipts received and cash remaining should equal the starting point of the petty cash fund. The information is then given to the accountant to prepare the journal entry. In the journal entry for replenishment, a debit is made for each expense and cash is credited. We are not crediting petty cash, but instead crediting cash because the accountant is going to write a check for the amount needed to replenish the fund back to its starting point. The process then repeats itself and the custodian takes the check to the bank to get the cash needed to put back into the box. The petty cash is now back at its starting point of $200. Now, again, throughout the month, employees can come and request money and provide the receipts. The custodian tracks all of the activity. However, this time, when our custodian reconciles the petty cash at the end of the month, there is a $2 shortage between the cash needed and the total of the receipts. When that information is given to the accountants must add in a debit to cash over and short to account for that $2 shortage. If there was an overage, then it would be a credit to cash over and short. Again, we are writing a check for only the amount needed to replenish the petty cash fund back to its $200 starting point. At this point, the process would repeat again, and the custodian would refill the petty cash box, and it would go on for the next few months. Now lastly, I want to review with you a summary of the journal entries for establishing the petty cash fund and replenishing the petty cash fund. Note that we do not credit petty cash, but instead credit cash when we are replenishing the fund. And we use that cash over and short account to balance out when our receipts and our cash needed are not the same amount.
So in short, in terms of the petty cash fund, the idea lang is that it's an established fund with a set amount. And then from there, gagamitan ng mga employees yung money inside the box so that they can make payments from the fund. Pero it's only during the replenishment that you need to make your journal entries. So, ano yung mga journal entries lang natin? There are just 3 types or 4 types of journal entries that we have to take into account. The first one is when you establish the fund. So, basically, at the start, sasabihin naman nila when they want to establish this. So, for petty cash fund, ang journal entry lang is debit PCF, credit cash of amount na sinabi. So, in that case, it's $200. So, debit PCF, credit cash. Then next would be, pag may kumukuha ng pera dun sa box, wala ka pang entries. Sige lang, ang gagawin lang nila is kukuha sila ng pera, in return, they will give you a receipt in that lockbox. So, for example, kung $200, let's say may printing ka, you need $10, ang gagawin mo is kukuha ka from the box, and in exchange, bibigyan mo sila ng resibo na, okay, here's a receipt for $10. And then at the end, when you replenish the fund, you just have to account for the various expenses, receivables, and supplies inside the box. And then from there, kung ano yung kulang, yun yung i-issue mo na credit in cash, right? So, let's look at a practical example. Let's say that yung in terms of the size of the fund or your accountability, 100. So, at any point in time, dapat yung laman ng box should be equal to 100. So now, after 15 days, meron kang nakita na, okay, may receipts ako for expenses na 50. Merong supplies na nasama na 10, and may receivables na 10, meaning nagsabi IOU. So, ang journal entry ko dito is number 1, and the first step is, mag-credit muna ako ng cash to the amount na kulang yung petty cash fund. So, in this case, dapat 100 siya at all times, ilan na lang yung cash na natira sa akin? Ang natira na lang na cash sa akin is 30. So automatically, my credit in cash would be credit cash of 100 minus 30 is equal to 70. And then, yung mga debits ko would be various expenses amounting to 50, various receivables amounting to 10, and various supplies amounting to 10. Nag-balance ba? Debits ko is 70, credits ko is 70. So in this case, masaya tayo because our PCF, our accountability, is equal to what is accounted for. Let's go to another scenario. Let's say, nag-establish ka ng fund, 100 raw. Pero, pagka-check mo, in terms of like, if in-add mo yung cash on hand and the various expenses and everything that's inside, 98 lang yung total amount. So, ano nangyari? Yung accountability mo, or yung what you accounted for is less than what it should be. So, 98 lang siya. Dapat 100 yung laman. So, dahil 98 lang siya, what happens? There is a cash shortage. The PCF amount of 100, mas less yung accounted for at 98. So, ano yung journal entry dito? The journal entry would look like this. So, again, step 1, it's a compound journal entry. So, ang step 1 ko is focus on the credit. So, ang credit would be, ano ba dapat yung size ng fund? 100. Ano ba yung cash on hand ko? 30. So, for me to bring that back to 100, 100 minus 30, I have to issue a check worth 70. Ano yung mga debits ko? Well, I have an expenses for 48, unused supplies of 10, and various supplies at 10. If you add all of these together, that would just amount to 68. So, normally, meron kang missing na debit. This debit of 2 is a cash over in short, is an expense. Okay? So, it's an expense. It makes sense. May shortage ka, so meron kang nawawalang pera. $2. So, ay 2 pesos. So, yung 2 pesos na yun is an expense. Kaya siya debit. So, one thing to keep in mind is, if your cash over short is in debit, that's a shortage. Kasi debit is the normal account for expenses. On the other hand, you have an overage. Again, ang fund mo lang dapat is 100. On the 15th day of the month, nung binilang mo, for some miracle, naging 105 yung totoong laman. So, mas mataas yung accounted for mo rather than yung PCF na you established. So, that is an overage. So, in the journal entry, again, ang pinakaunang gagawin mo is ano ba yung credit in cash? That's the size of the fund, 100, minus 30 is 70. And then, ano yung mga debits mo? Various expenses, 55. Unused supplies, 10. Receivables, 10. So, meron kang, if you add all of these, it's a debit of 75. Ito, may missing na 5. Itong 5 na to is a cash over in short. In this case, it's a revenue. So, another way of looking at it is that if the cash over in short is a credit, that's a revenue. Because the normal balance of revenue is credit. So, pag may overage, may credit. So, to summarize, cash shortage is when yung accounted for mo, nung pagbilang mo ng box, is less than the PCF fund. And ang mangyayari is you'll have a debit of cash over in short, which is an expense. On the other hand, if mas malaki yung amount ng box rather than kung ano yung in-establish mo ng fund, you will have a credit of cash over in short, and that's gonna be a revenue because this is a cash overage. But please do take note na this scenario is when immaterial lang yung amount. So let's say 5 pesos lang, 2 pesos lang. Sasabihin sa inyo ng problem kung immaterial or not yung amount. Pag material, same concept, pero iba lang yung pangalan. Receivable from custodian or payable to custodian. Current asset, current liability. Just take note of all of these names. Pero for me, ang mas importante is gets nyo yung cash over in short. So, in summary, ito lang naman yung journal entry. So, pag immaterial, it's cash over in short. Pag material, receivable from custodian. Kapag immaterial na overage, credit cash over in short, payable to custodian. And then lastly, you'll have a PCF wherein at the end, pag na-replenish mo na siya, sasabihin nila, parang mukhang konti lang pala or mukhang sobra yung fund natin. So there's two ways. Either itataas yung amount ng PCF, so that's gonna be debit PCF, credit cash, or ibababa yung PCF. Debit cash, credit PCF, right? So, let's practice. The fund, so meron kang PCF, right? And the difference below 500 is considered immaterial. So, let's check this scenario. The first thing is, ang cash on hand mo raw is 120. The problem states that yung PCF mo is 5,000, right? So, kung yung PCF mo is 5,000 and yung cash on hand mo is 120, the first thing you do is you credit cash at 5,000 minus 120 is 4,880. And then meron kang mahahanap ng mga ganito. So, all you have to do is delivery expense, postage expense of 1,350 and miscellaneous expense. And then, you check 24 plus 1,350 plus 1,030. So, let's do the calculator. So, 24 plus 1,350 plus 1,030. 4,780. So, merong kulang na 100 sa debit. And that kulang sa 100 sa debit is a cash over and short. Why cash over and short? Because anything below 500 is immaterial. So, this one, it will tell you na dahil debit to, it's an expense. And therefore, you have a cash shortage. Next, scenario, nag-replenish ka ulit. Let's say 5,000 yung laman ng PCF mo. So, again, step 1, ano yung credit natin? 5,000 PCF minus what's in cash on hand. So 5,000 minus 90, 4,910. And then again, ililist down lang natin ano yung mga expenses. Delivery, postage, miscellaneous, entertainment. When you add all of those together and compare it to 4,910, ano mangyayari? So you have 2060 plus 750 plus 1,920 plus 320, 5,050. So, mas malaki si debit ng kay 4,910 ng how many? Minus 4,910. May missing kang credit of 140. That 140 is below 500. So, this is a credit of cash over. Difference, sorry. It says naman here, difference below 500 is considered material. So, nag-iba na yung scenario. So now, cash over and short siya dapat, but dahil material siya, because it says here, difference below 500 is considered material, then magiging lang siyang payable to custodian. So the fund was increased to 6,000, so by 6,000. So ang journal entry lang is debit PCF, credit cash of 6,000. So with that said, I think it's 10 o'clock. Basically, we're done na rin with PCF. So for me, for the people na parang getting overwhelmed with theory, again, mas madali siyang intindihan in the lens of an exercise. So I've already uploaded the exercise. So separate exercises yon. You also have your problem set 7 na in-upload ko na rin yung answer key through an Excel. So ang only deadline na you have to take note is kailangan nyo i-submit siya by Saturday. Just so that I have complacency na nagawa nyo yung exercises on your own. Now, I'll take a 5-minute break because I think that's the official end of our class. The next portion, so I'll continue the recording. The next portion, I'll deep dive in the last topic, which is bank reconciliation. So feel free to go to your classes. Just make sure to watch the recordings after the class. And then the last thing would be on Friday, pending no announcements, online ulit tayo. No more quizzes. We'll focus na talaga on reviewing for the exam. There. Are there any questions before I formally pause the recording? And then we'll take a 5-minute I'll take a 5-minute break. But again, feel free to go to your classes na. In terms of like your other classes? Are there any questions? If not, kindly thumbs up and then kindly message me in chat kung meron kayong mga questions. But at this point, I'll stop the recording. Isa na lang yung tatapusin natin, which is bank recon. And then, by then, we're all set na for module 2. Sige. So I think if everything's okay, I'll pause the recording and then I'll resume it after 5 minutes. So 10:05. Thank you so much. So to begin, the last thing that we need to do is we're done with internal control. We're done with cash inclusions. And then finally, we're done with PCF. So now we have our bank reconciliation. So for me, similar with inventory cost flow, bank reconciliation looks intimidating, but if na-perfect nyo siya, meaning yun talaga yung finokusan nyo, it will solve your worries in terms of the more comprehensive, long problem types of questions when it comes to cash. So in the sense, what does bank reconciliation do? Honestly, in terms of cash and cash equivalents, isa lang naman yung tinitingnan ni cash bank reconciliation. And as the name suggests, it's your cash in bank, right? So, in cash in bank, there are 3 types of deposits, right? So you have your checking account, your non-interesting bearing, with your deposit slips, your savings account, which is basically interest bearing, and your interest bearing na time deposit din. So you have 3 different deposits. Pero out of those, ang binabank reconciliation natin is only for checking accounts. So again, itong pinakamahirap na topic na to in terms of bank recon, we're just looking at one thing. And that is, how do we reconcile our checking account? So the question is, how can we best master bank reconciliation? Well, there are 3 ways to do it. Pero the very first thing that we need to know is we need to understand what is the relationship between our bank in terms of our checking account and our book. And then there are ways to look at the book balance or bank statement. And then finally, we're gonna do our bank reconciliation with our adjusted balance method. So knowing lang our book reconciling items and our bank reconciling items. So, book to bank relationship. So, ang major idea lang ng bank reconciliation is that your cash per your book should be equal to your cash per your bank at all times. So, at the end, when you do bank reconciliation, the major goal is kailangan your cash per book is equal to your cash per bank. These are what we call reciprocal accounts. So to show you, Company X collected 100,000 from a customer in settlement of an account. The collection is deposited at Union Bank. What will happen in the form of your book, which is what we're familiar with, would be, we'll have a journal entry. We'll have a cash in bank for Union Bank, credit accounts receivable. So that's from the perspective of us, the one that's recording in the book. However, in the ones from the bank's perspective, so may 100,000 tayo sa bank book. In the bank's perspective, what happened instead was they received cash, pero may utang sila kay Company X na 100,000. Meaning, at any time, sinabi ni Company X na kailangan ko yung pera, may accounts payable si bank na 100,000. So, plus 100,000 rin yung pera ni cash. So, as you can see, the company debited cash. Nag-debit tayo ng 100,000. Pero the bank credited your account. Debited 100,000. The account was credited in your bank. Pero nag-balance pa rin 100,000. Let's look at another thing. Let's say nag-issue ka ng check. So in your journal entry, that would be debits accounts payable 30,000. Nabawasan na yung pera mo, so credit cash in bank, Union Bank. Ano mangyayari? Out of the utang, the bank will debit your account, Company X account, 30,000. They will credit cash of 30,000. So ano yung nangyari? Nag-balance pa rin, negative 30,000 for the book, negative 30,000 for the bank. Pero ano nangyari? The company credited the cash, pero the bank debited your account. So, baliktad lang, right? So, in a nutshell, deposits, you increase in cash. So, that's a book debit, pero that's a bank credit, as you can see from the previous. And then, you had an issuing of checks, which decreased in cash. So, that's a book credit, pero that's a bank debit. So, baliktad lang pag bank. So, in total, if you look at it, your beginning balance of 0 plus your book debits minus your book credits will give you your ending balance of cash per book of 70. On the other hand, you have your cash per bank plus the bank credit minus the bank debit of 30 will give you your cash per bank at 70. So, nag-balance. Cash per book is equal to your cash per bank. Ang kailangan na importante is baliktad lang yung point of view ni bank. So when one account is debited, the other is credited. So anything increase is a book debit, pero that's a bank credit. If it's a decrease, it's a book credit or a bank debit. And at the end of the day, your cash per book should be equal to your cash per bank. So now we can go in terms of bank reconciliation. So bank reconciliation is the process of reconciling your cash book balance and your bank balance. And the question is, bakit ba nagkakaroon ng problema? It's because there are time lags that prevent one party from another. So, ikaw, nagre-record ka. Si bank nagre-record. So, sometimes, may lag lang when you record and when bank records. Or, nagkakaroon ng error on one side. So, the statements which bring together our cash per book and cash per bank is your bank reconciliation. Ang bank reconciliation is done monthly. Why? Because bank reconciliation happens monthly because bank statements are released monthly. So there are different ways. You have book to bank to book, but ang pinaka-importante is the adjusted balance method. So you're gonna be telling me, so which one tells us the correct balance for cash? Si cash per book ba or si cash per bank? Well, let's look at this scenario. Pag cash per book, ang tinitingnan mo, ang major guidance mo is your general ledger. So, this is basically a T account of your cash, right? So, beginning balance 0, and then you have your increases, you have your decreases, and then ultimately, you have 50,000. So, on the right side, you have check disbursement. So, check disbursements, lower your cash. Deposits increase your cash, right? So, ang unadjusted natin is cash per book at 50,000. On the other hand, you have an unadjusted cash per bank of 84,000. Ito naman yung itsura ng bank statement. You have the date, the check numbers, withdrawal ba siya or deposit, and then yung balance. So, it starts off at 60,000, may withdrawal ka, and then you'll have different withdrawals, pero at every day, sinasabi niya yung balance ng bank. All the way until you have 84,000, right? So we have your withdrawals, your deposits, and then you'll have the different credit memos. So credit memos, nagpapataas sa bank, and different debit memos. So we have 50,000 per book, 84,000 per bank. Which of the two tells you the correct balance? Is it the cash per book or the cash per bank? And the answer is, neither is correct, right? So right now, we're scared, right? Unadjusted cash per book is not equal to the unadjusted cash per bank, but both are not balanced, and both are not the correct balance of cash. So what we need to do is we first need to adjust using book reconciling items, which is basically bank credit memos, bank debit memos, and book errors, so that finally we'll arrive with the correct cash balance per book. And then on the other side, for the bank side, we need to reconcile using deposits in transit, outstanding checks, and bank errors, so that we arrive with the correct cash balance, so that finally mag-equal sila. And this is the adjusted balance method. Na you have cash per book na unadjusted, cash per bank na unadjusted, and then you look at it per side. So, i-adjust mo muna yung book reconciling items so that you arrive with the correct cash balance, and then you go to the other side. unadjusted balance ng bank, i-adjust mo using bank reconciling items so that you'll arrive with the correct cash balance. So with that said, let's first adjust our book balance. So ito yung ledger. So what are the book reconciling items? So book reconciling items in a nutshell is that there are some transactions unknown sa bookkeeper na you can only find when you receive the bank statement or when errors are discovered. So let's look. So ito yung alam ni bookkeeper. Ito yung kaka-receive lang niyang bank statement. So ano yung mga bank credit memos? Ano yung mga things na magpapataas ng cash account natin per our books? So bank credit memos are basically items that credit ni bank, meaning pinataas ni bank, pero hindi pa na-record sa book. Right. So what are the examples of this? So ang titingnan natin for bank credit memos would be the deposits. So first is, i-check natin, lahat ba ng increases in this portion na record sa book? So yung 60,000 na record natin, yung 20,000 na record natin, yung 30,000 na record natin, and then yung 40,000, this is in reference to a deposit na hindi pa nagre-reflect sa bank. Pero we're focusing on the book. So that's not important. What is important is under the deposits in the bank statement, there's a credit memo of 15,000 that is in reference to a note collection. So number one is, pag may nakita kayong note collection, proceeds from a bank loan, or matured time deposits, all of those are what you call credit memos. So again, the formal definition of credit memos are items na ni-record ni bank na hindi deposit, pero hindi mo na-record sa book. So in this case, ano yung mga hindi deposit? Itong merong CM, credit memo. So yan, na-record ni bank pero hindi mo pa na-record. So you have to add bank credit memos kasi nagpataas siya. So first thing, for bank reconciliation under the book side, add your credit memo. So automatic, if you see NC, PL, or MD, note receivables collected, proceeds from the bank loan, or matured time deposits, we increase our book side. So may 15,000 na credit memo on the note collection. So from our unadjusted book balance of 50,000, we add back bank credit memos. So meron tayong 15,000. The credit memo is the note collected. So we're done with credit memos. So pag may credit memos tayo, may debit memos tayo. So similarly, ang titingnan naman natin sa bank statement are the withdrawals. So again, debit memos are those that are debited by the bank that are not check disbursements but are already not yet recorded in the book. So 5,000 na record ba natin? Yes, that's check 721. 10,000 na record ba natin sa book? Yes, that's check 722. 18,000, 723, and 2,000, 724. Meron ka pang 2 checks na hindi nag-reflect sa bank, but we don't care about that because what we're caring about is ano ba yung hindi na-record ni book. And ang hindi na-record ni book is these 2 debit memos, the 5,000 and the 1,000. So what are those? So again, examples of bank debit memos would be NSF or bounce check, defective checks, bank service charge, or reduction of loan. So anytime may makita kayo na NSF, defective checks, BSC or bank service charge, or reduction of loans, these are bank debit memos. These are kailangan bawasan natin. So ito, yung 5,000 and 1,000, kailangan isubtract rin natin under the book side. So now we have, from the unadjusted book, we adjusted for the bank credit memo, so we added 15,000. We subtracted our bank debit memos, so NSF and bank service charge. And then finally, probably magkakaroon ng book error. So basically, book error is tama si bank pero mali si book. So for example, nagkaroon ka ng bank deposit na 10,000. Pero ni-record mo lang as 1,000. So sino nagkamali? Ikaw. Because tama nga si bank na 10,000 pero na-record mo lang ng 1,000. So, in your side, kailangan mo increase yung 1,000 na record mo by 9,000. So, meron kang book error, so you have to add 9,000. On the other hand, paano kung na-record mo siya as 100,000? Mali rin yun kasi the correct amount is with the bank. So, 10,000. So, our adjustment for errors would be 90,000, right? So, for example, may correct check disbursement raw based on the bank. 20,000. Yung disbursement, kala mo 40,000. So, overstated na yung cash disbursements mo. So, mali na 40,000. Dapat 20,000 lang. So, we have to add back 20,000 kasi to offset yung minus 40,000 na ginawa mo. On the other hand, if you have understated cash disbursements, like ni-record mo lang as 2,000, you have to subtract further 18,000 kasi 20,000 dapat yung disbursements mo. So when it comes to this, there are no errors in the bank kasi walang nakastate. And therefore, dahil walang errors, 0. So finally, we'll get 50,000 plus your bank credit memos of note collections of 15,000 minus your bank debit memos of NSF of 5,000 and bank service charge. If we add all of those together, so we'll have 50,000 plus 15,000 minus 5,000 minus 1,000. You'll have 59,000. So this is the correct cash balance. So ang expectation ko is that 59,000 rin dapat yung adjusted bank balance. So in summary, and ito yung i-memorize nyo and familiarize yourself nyo when it comes to the book side. Cash per book plus bank credit memos such as, so plus note receivable collected, plus proceeds from bank loan, plus matured time deposits, minus bank debit memos, NSF, defective checks, bank service charge, reduction of loan, plus or minus your book errors will be your correct cash balance. So, in applying this formula, you have 50,000, may note collected ka, so your total BCM is 15,000. Meron kang bounce check of 5,000 and 1,000, so your total BDM is 6,000. And then finally, you'll arrive with your 59,000 in terms of your cash. So we're done with book balance. Now, where do we go for bank balance? So for bank balance, let's focus on this side. Right? So alam na natin na sa book, it's plus BCM minus BDM plus book errors. So yung mga bank reconciling items are those that are, because of clearing days, hindi naka-reflect in the bank statement. So, merong information here in our book na hindi nasama sa bank statement. So, first is the concept of deposits in transit. These are cash collections na already recorded in our books pero hindi pa na-reflect sa bank because of clearing time. So, let's check. We have 60,000, 60,000, 20,000, 20,000, 30,000, 30,000. May 40,000 pa tayong deposit na hindi naka-reflect sa bank. That is the classic example of our deposits in transit. And what do we do with deposits in transit? We add deposits in transit. So month-end collections forwarded to the bank for deposit pero hindi pa nakalagay sa statement, or undeposited collections are examples of DIT. So itong 40,000 na to is a DIT. Again, why? Because pumasok na si 60, Jan 6. Pumasok na si Jan 13, 20,000. So may 1 day lag. Jan 25, pumasok nung Jan 26. Nung Jan 31, dun mo lang pinasok si 40,000. Kaya hindi nag-reflect. Kasi Jan 30 sa'yo binigay yung bank statement. So this 40,000 is an example of your deposits in transit. So with your unadjusted bank, you have 84,000 plus your DIT of 40,000. And then, ano na yung next? We look at net outstanding checks. So again, similar concept. These are checks that are already recorded as disbursements pero hindi pa nag-reflect sa bank. So titingnan natin to. So let's check. Check 721. nag-clear. 10,000, 722, 10,000, nandyan sa bank statement. 723, 18,000, nandyan. 2,000, 724, nandyan. Pero, si check 725 and 726 at 37 and 28, we already recorded na bumawas sa cash natin in the book, pero in the bank, hindi pa siya lumabas. So this is an example of outstanding checks. So outstanding checks minus certified checks, which is basically is equal to your net outstanding checks. So in this case, dahil wala tayong certified checks, i-check natin ulit. So 721 nag-clear, 722 nag-clear, nag-withdraw, 723 18, 724 2,000. Itong 725 and 726 are things na we already recorded as disbursements, pero on the bank side, hindi siya nag-appear. And therefore, we need to subtract 65,000. And bakit 65,000? It's 37 plus 28. So now, we have subtract our NOC. So 84,000 plus deposits in transit of 40,000 minus net outstanding checks of 37,000 and 28,000. And then finally, we'll just adjust for bank errors. So let's say, check of company Y was charged against company X account. So, meaning, tayo si company X, and then merong company Y. Ang nangyari is, si bank, nag-add sa atin ng 10,000. Hindi naman tayo si company Y. So therefore, kumuha ng 10,000 si bank sa atin because kala niya tayo si company Y. But we're not company Y, we're company X. And that's a bank error. And therefore, we have to reinstate that 10,000. On the other hand, paano kung may bank credit? Bank credited 10,000, meaning pinataas niya yung account natin. Pero hindi naman dapat tayo. That's an erroneous bank statement. So that's minus 10,000. But for this case, there's no errors. So we can finally solve. 84,000 so we have ano yung solution for bank? 84,000 plus DIT of 40,000 minus 37,000 minus 28,000. Sorry. Minus 28,000. It's equal to 59,000. So, nag-balance. So again, ang tatandaan lang sa bank side is cash per bank plus DIT minus NOC or net outstanding checks plus or minus your bank errors will give you your correct cash balance of 59,000. So you'll have DIT. So in a nutshell and in a summary, bank reconciliation would be you start off with your cash per book and your cash per bank and you focus on adjusting them. You focus on one side first. Adjust your cash per book by your book reconciling items so that you have your correct cash balance. And then from that side, tapos na tayo sa side na to, let's go to the bank side. So we adjust using bank reconciling items so to arrive with the correct cash balance so that magbabalance sila. In a nutshell, ano yung mga impact? Ganito lang yung kailangan nyo i-master. Sa cash per book, it's plus bank credit memos minus bank debit memos plus or minus book errors will give you your correct cash balance. On the other hand, cash per bank would be plus deposits in transit minus net outstanding checks plus or minus bank errors will give you your correct cash balance. So in this, 50,000 yung unadjusted, 84,000 yung unadjusted, but at the end of the day, you'll have 59,000 and 59,000 because of your reconciling item. So ito yung itsura and ito yung itsura. So that ends our bank reconciliation. So another way of looking at it is that pag DIT, you add sa bank. Pag outstanding check, you deduct sa bank. Pag bank errors, add or deduct. Pag credit memos, you add sa book. Pag debit memos, you deduct sa book. And then for book errors, you deduct. So let's master. Right? So let's master. Dalawa yung ibibigay sa inyo. The bank statement and the general ledger. We're gonna apply the adjusted balance method. So bear with me. So this is the first exercise for this. First is, let's get the beginning bank and book balances. So we start off with this as our major. So cash per book and cash per bank. And then bank credit memos, and you'll have your DITs, right? So let's start. Let's start muna with cash per bank. Ano ang cash per bank? It looks dizzying, pero if you really look at the bottom, the balance will be here. 277,000. It's the balance at the last day of the month. So our cash per bank is 277,000. Itong 125, so another way of solving for 277 is the beginning balance plus your total debits minus your total credits will be your ending balance. So beginning balance of 125 minus 25 debits, kasi yun yung mga subtractions, plus 177 is equal to 277,000. So our cash per bank officially would be cash per bank. In these slides, nagkamali lang, this should be deposits in transit, right? So next, let's get the ending balance of the book unadjusted. Well, here, titingnan lang rin natin is yung ending balance on January 30. So 285,120. But another way of solving for this would be the beginning balance plus the debits minus the credits is equal to 285,120. So 178,500 plus 144,620 minus 38,000 is equal to 285,120. So, with that said, hindi siya nag-balance. 285,120 sa book, 277 sa per bank. So, step 2. We ignore previous month outstanding checks and deposits in transit. So, how do we do that? Look at the beginning balance of the bank versus the beginning balance of the book. Previous deposits in transit, look at early deposits that are in bank but not in book. And previous OC, look for a check number in bank that's not in the book. So, let's apply. Number 1 is we have to ignore our previous deposits and transits and our outstanding checks. So, anong gagawin natin? We look at our beginning cash of 178,500 and the beginning bank of 125,000. Now, yung deposit na 56,000 and yung check na 25,000, if mapapansin nyo, wala nang deposit na 56 in the book. 160 na yung next. And then check 23531, 23531, wala siya sa book. And therefore, we have to ignore our previous DIT. So, how to solve that is, basically, 125 plus 56 minus 2.5K is equal to 178,500. And then mo makikita na this is a previous month deposit in transit and this is a previous month outstanding check. So, in order to ignore DIT, we just have to balance the beginning balance of the bank and the beginning balance of the book by looking at previous month's deposits in transit and the previous month's outstanding check. From there, i-ignore na natin si 301 and si 305 or March 1, March 5. Step 3, we start with deposits. So first, find what's in the book that's not in the bank and find what's in the bank that's not in the book. So let's focus on the debits. So may deposit tayo based on our book of 4,620. Meron tayong deposit na 46,200. Wait. Let's stop. There's an error. According to the book, it's 4,620, pero 46,200 yung sa bank. If no explicit statement, pag may discrepancy si book at saka si bank, we assume that the bank is correct. And therefore, this is an example of a book error. So, again, for the format, it should be what is and what should be and what is the book adjustment. Right now, we recorded it as 4,620 deposit. Pero what it should be really is 46,200. So, kulang tayo ng 41,580. So, going back to our statement, may book error tayo na we have to add back 41,580. So, here, na-reconcile natin. This is an example of a book error na nakita natin when we compared it with the bank. So, okay na yan. Next deposit na tayo. 68,000. Let's look at the next credit, 68,000. Okay, pumasok. Last, may deposit tayo of 72,000. Pero, lumabas ba siya sa bank? Hindi. So, this deposit is a deposits in transit of 72,000. And therefore, we have to add 72,000 on the bank side. And then, we're done with the deposits on the book side. Meron pang natirang mga credit memos. 6,300, which is basically transfer, and an interest of 500. So our total credit memos would be 6,300 and 500, so 6,800. So plus 6,800 na credit memos. So we're done already with our deposits, right? So tapos na yung deposits na debit side, tapos na yung mga credit memos on the bank side. We're done. Next would be end with checks. So find what's in the book that's not in the bank, and find what's in the bank that's not in the books. So right now, we have our bank credit memos, our DIP, and our 41,580 book errors. Ang kulang na lang is our debit memos and our outstanding checks. So let's look at our statements. So may check 23533. So that's the 5,23533. Meron tayong bank statement na 23353. So stop, merong error. Why? According to the book, it's 23353. Pero, so cash per book is 235XX. Pero yung isa sa bank, cash per bank is 23353. May error. Kasi lahat nagsa-start with 235 eh. So, the bank charge a check that's not ours. Kasi ang mga checks natin, it starts with 235X. X, right? 235, 235, 235, 235. Pero ito, 23353. So, there's an error. The bank charged a check that's not ours. So, we have to adjust for the bank error. So, binawasan pala tayo ng bank for a check na hindi naman sa atin. Therefore, yung check na 8,500, binawas nung bank. What it should be is that wala dapat silang binawas sa atin. So, in terms of our bank adjustment, it should be an increase of 8,500. So, our bank error is plus 8,500. So, itong check na to pala, itong 23353 yung naka-highlight, this is not our check. Right? And then finally, sa bank, we'll have our check of 23535, which is 23535. So, ano yung mga checks na nasa book natin that's not in the bank statement? Well, it's gonna be the 11,000, the 7,000 check, the 11,000 check, the 33 check, the 12 check, and the 25 check. All of these are checks na ni-record na natin as disbursements, pero hindi pa nag-reflect sa bank statement. So that would be our outstanding checks. So 7,000 plus 11 plus 33 plus 12 plus 25 is equal to outstanding checks of 25,000. So our net outstanding checks is minus 25,000. So now, nakompleto na natin yung bank side. Which is, if you calculate, so bank side muna tayo. Unadjusted is 277,000 plus 72,000 minus 25,000 plus 85 332,500. So ang expectation natin is that the correct cash balance should also be 332,500. So let's finish it. We're done now with the outstanding checks. Ano na lang yung remaining debit? Merong debit memo tayo na 1,000, which is a check fee. So our debit memo is 1,000, so minus 1,000. So now we're complete na rin when it comes to our cash balance. So let's double check. Nag-balance ba? Naging 332,500 ba? Well, let's check. 285,120 plus 6,800 minus 1,000 plus 41,850, 41,580 is 332,500. So, it balanced. So, itong example na binigay ko sa inyo is one of the hardest. So, if na-gets nyo to and binalikan nyo to, you're good for bank reconciliation. If super na-gets nyo this exercise, you're good for bank reconciliation. The last step in bank reconciliation is we journalize. Dahil we're journalizing, we only look at the book side. So in the book side, ito lang yung mga adjustments. So step 1, what is the difference between the adjusted balance and the balance per book? So 332,500. So we'll have, or another way of looking at it is, so may transfer na accounts receivable of 63, may interest of 500, so interest income of 500, may fee, so may expense tayo na bank service charge, and may error tayo of 41,580. So that's your cash on hand. And then your cash in bank would be 47,380, right? So in essence, ganun lang yung bank recon. So for journalizing, please go back to the exercises na I already uploaded, right? So the last is, there are other methods, pero I'd rather focus na on our financial statement presentation. So at the end of the day, we're just gonna present cash as current asset, and it's gonna be the first line item recorded. So you'll have cash and cash equivalents, and then i-breakdown mo lang in the notes. So honestly, with that lecture done, we're officially done with all the concepts that you'll need for cash. Bank reconciliation is the most intimidating. So treat it as 50% of your cash. 50% are the other subtopics. Master the subtopics first, and then master bank recon. So with that, we can now officially end the lecture. Let me know if you have any questions. And then on Friday, we'll discuss the supposed quizzes for each, right? So with that, thank you so much, and I'll see you on Friday.